Well, I hope you like that. The next story is about... Oh, dear, don't look now. I'm afraid it's that man I was telling you about.
Hey, Mr. Aspel!
Yes, hello.
Yeah. What do you get if you cross a sheep with a kangaroo?
I don't know. What do you get if you cross a sheep with a kangaroo?
A woolly jumper. Ta-da!
Thank you very much indeed. As I was saying, this next story is all about some people...
Hey, Mr. Aspel!
Yes?
Yeah. What would be the result if a waiter dropped a dish of turkey?
I don't know. What would be the result if a waiter dropped a dish of turkey?
Nothing less than the fall of Turkey, the overthrow of Greece, and the breakup of China. Ta-da!
Now let's have a story from Wales, isn't it? I don't know if you've been to Wales, but Welsh people often end a sentence with, isn't it? Don't ask me why, and I don't think it would be much good asking them either. None of my Welsh friends seems to know. So I'll tell you an old Welsh story now, isn't it? It's called The Good Old Man. Long ago, in a pretty whitewashed cottage in West Wales, quite near Llandovery, there lived a good old man and his good old wife. Jones was their name, Hugh Jones and Gwyneth Jones. In Wales, there are so many people called Jones, or Williams, or Thomas, or Evans, that lots of them have nicknames to distinguish them from all the others. For example, if one Mr. Jones is a baker, he might be called Jones the Bread. If one Mr. Evans is the milkman, he's Evans the Milk. Sometimes the nicknames are given because of the way the person looks, and they make a joke about it. The silliest I know is the one given to a man who had one tooth in the middle of his head, and he was known as Dicentraleatin. But back to the story. Our Hugh Jones was a good old man, as I said, and he was such a cheerful old soul that he was known as Jones Good Morning, because he was always friendly and polite to everybody, friends or strangers. Now, old Hugh Jones and Gwyneth Jones had a certain routine that they followed every evening. As soon as they'd finished supper, Gwyneth would clear away the dishes and build up the fire for the evening, while Hugh would carry away the bucket full of the washing-up water and potato peelings and bits of carrot and onion skins. And he carried the bucket out of the door of the little whitewashed cottage, down the path to the wall at the bottom of the garden. Then he tipped it all over the wall. It didn't just lie there, of course. His neighbour's pig would come snuffling and snorting around every morning to mop up all the bits that hadn't soaked into the ground. Everyone was satisfied. Gwyneth Jones was grateful for Hugh's help, the pig was delighted, and Hugh was happy because they were happy. So that was the routine, and it went on like that for a very long time. Then one evening, Hugh came down the path at moonrise with his bucket of greasy water and peelings, and he was about to tip the lot over the wall when he noticed a stranger standing by the wall. Hugh knew everybody in the district, and this was someone he'd never seen before. And he would certainly have noticed him if he had seen him before, because this was no ordinary person. Now, old Hugh Jones Good Morning wasn't a big man. In fact, you'd have called him just about medium height. But he towered over the stranger, who was dressed in the weirdest of clothes. They were mostly bright green, and his waistcoat was red, and they were very old-fashioned, the sort of clothes that people had worn hundreds of years before. Above the red waistcoat, squinty eyes gleamed, and below the green trousers were the biggest feet that old Hugh had ever seen. "Good evening," said Jones Good Morning.
"Good evening,"
said the stranger, in a sad sort of way.
"I'm afraid I have a complaint to make."
"A complaint?" said Hugh Jones, wondering what on earth the stranger could have to complain about when they'd never even met before.
"Yes,"
said the stranger.
"It's about that bucket of swill you tip over the wall every evening. I wish you wouldn't do it."
"But I've always done it," said the good old man.
"That's the trouble,"
said the small visitor, heaving a large sigh. What do you mean, trouble, man? Said Hugh. It doesn't cause any trouble. There's good things in that swill, as you call it, which my neighbour's pig likes very much. There's potato peelings, a bit of carrot, and onion skins, all quite tasty. The stranger seemed to ignore this, because he then said an extraordinary thing.
Would you do me a favour?
He asked.
Would you mind very much standing on my feet?
Standing on your feet? Gasped the old man. What's that got to do with anything? It did seem a strange thing to ask.
It will help, believe me,
said the little man.
Because then I shall be able to show you what is the matter.
And he looked so gloomy that Hugh was afraid he was going to burst into tears. All right, man, he said. Anything for a bit of peace and quiet. Come here now. So the pair of them stood very close to the wall, and old Hugh, feeling more than slightly ridiculous, stood on the stranger's feet. They were certainly big enough to take Hugh and several other people, but still the old man felt most uncomfortable. Then as he glanced down to the spot where he tipped the bucket every evening, he saw a remarkable thing. It was as if the ground had become clear water, and he could see right down through it. And what he saw was the roof of a cottage just like his own, a white cottage with a tiled roof. But it wasn't quite like his own, because whereas the good old man's cottage was always clean and spotless, this cottage was in a dreadful state. Potato peelings were draped all over the roof and chimney, onion skins lay in the gutters, and bits of carrot were floating in the water butt by the side of the cottage. Dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, murmured old Hugh. What a mess! Dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
You can say that again,
said the stranger.
No, don't bother. That's not the worst of it. All you can see is the mess outside my cottage. What you don't realize is that a lot of the stuff you tip out of your bucket goes down the chimney and into our living room. It's not very nice having your fireplace full of onion skins and bits of carrot all over your carpet. And this has been going on for 30 years, man. 30 years! My poor old wife has just about had enough. We've even got potato peelings stuck to our windows, and that really spoils the view, I can tell you.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, said Hugh again. This is terrible, man. I had no idea. But what can I do about it? I have to help my wife, you see. She's getting old, and the pig depends on me to tip the swill over the wall for him every day.
Well,
sighed the stranger,
do you think you could think of some other way of doing it without making such a mess of my house?
Well, I think so, said Hugh. I think I could think about the problem, but I don't think I could think of a solution. Not immediately, anyhow.
Well, let's sit down and think together,
said the stranger. The old man stepped off the stranger's feet, and the cottage below vanished from sight. The pair of them sat down together in silence for a long, long time.
Have you thought of anything?
Asked the stranger at last. Afraid not, said the old man. Have you?
No,
sighed the little stranger.
But I tell you what I'll do. I'll go home now, and I'll come back in 3 days' time. Perhaps you'll have thought of something by then.
And that's what they agreed. When the good old man told his good old wife about what had happened, she was very upset, and she wept to think of all the trouble they'd caused. For the next couple of evenings, the old man continued to tip the pig swill over the wall as he had always done. On the third night, he went once again down the garden path. It was really quite dark, and he didn't think he'd be able to see anything clearly. But then suddenly, out of the gloom, the stranger appeared.
Good evening,
he said, and he was sadder than ever. Good evening, said Hugh. I must tell you that my wife and I are really very sorry about all this. Gwyneth was terribly upset when I told her, cried her eyes out, man.
Well, I appreciate that,
said the stranger.
But my wife's crying her eyes out because we're still getting a bucket full of pig swill on top of us every evening. It's not very nice, you know. Have you managed to think of anything?
Well, indeed I have, said Hugh. And for the first time, the stranger's squinty little eyes brightened.
You have?
He said.
And what are you going to do?
Well, it's this, said the old man. I've got in touch with Jenkins the hammer, he's the local carpenter, and with Di Chisel, he's the local stonemason. And they're going to move our back door to the other side of the house. You won't get a chimney. And that's what he did. The door was moved, and although it cost quite a lot of money, the builders did a very tidy job. In fact, as it turned out, it didn't really cost a lot of money, because every morning when the good old man and his wife came downstairs for breakfast, they found a shiny, old-fashioned silver sixpence pushed under their brand new door.